Today on Dusted Drive, we are looking at one of the most misunderstood American performance cars of its era. A car that never fit neatly into the muscle car box, yet quietly outgunned many of them. The 1970 Oldsmobile Toronado GT. Call it a gentleman's muscle car, call it a luxury hot rod. Oldsmobile never really knew what to call it either. What they did know was this. In 1970, they built the most powerful Oldsmobile you could buy. And they hid that power inside a front-wheel drive, personal luxury coupe. At the center of this story is the Toronado GT package, offered only in the final year of the first-generation Toronado. That first generation began in 1966 and ended here in 1970. Before the car changed character entirely in 1971, bigger, softer, more conventional, more corporate, this car came from the sharper, more experimental era when the Toronado debuted in 1966. It was radical hidden headlights, blade-like fenders, a shape that felt futuristic without being flashy. By 1970, much of that purity had been smoothed over. The hidden headlamps were gone, replaced by exposed units for the first time in the model's history. The body grew heavier in appearance, even if the underlying architecture remained unique. Up front, the hood tells the story immediately. A massive power dome stretches nearly the full width, flanked by narrow catwalks between the hood and the tops of the fenders. A strong center crease runs lengthwise, reinforcing the car's sense of mass. It is less delicate than the earlier Tornadoes, but more assertive. As you move to the front three-quarter view, the Jeep reveals itself in small but deliberate ways. A simple badge near the driver's side headlamp reads, Toronado GT. No shouting, no oversized lettering, just enough to signal that this car is different. The other giveaway is the striping, bold outlines tracing the wheel arches, exclusive to the GT package. It was a visual cue meant to connect performance with presence, even as Oldsmobile softened the shape of those arches compared to the razor-sharp forms of 1966. By 1970, the wheel openings were more blended. Less defined, the body surfaces flowed together more gently. This was not an accident. Oldsmobile was trying to make the Toronado feel more approachable, more conventional. Sales of the original 1966 model had been strong. Roughly 40,000 units, but enthusiasm faded quickly afterward. The Toronado never again matched that early success. At the rear, another late-generation detail appears. Small winglets, almost like restrained fins, added in 1969 and carried into 1970. Earlier cars did not have them. They seemed to exist mainly to visually tie the rear of the car to the sharper front end, creating a sense of balance that earlier versions lacked. The GT package also brought functional changes. Dual exhaust cutouts integrated into the rear bumper, something you would not get on a standard Tornado. These details mattered because, mechanically, this was no ordinary Oldsmobile coupe, unfortunately. Many 1970 Tornadoes were ordered with vinyl roofs. By this point, vinyl tops were being aggressively pushed by dealers. They were profitable. They reduced finishing labor at the factory, and they permanently altered the look of otherwise clean designs. The Toronado suffered from this trend more than most. Without the vinyl roof, the body lines speak clearly, in metallic colors, especially deep greens. The long crease, running the length of the car, catches light beautifully. The way the sun picks up the surface behind the rear wheel is subtle and elegant, not flashy, just well-sculpted. Production numbers tell another part of the story. The Toronado GT was rare even when new. Only about 5,300 were built for 1970. Today, that rarity is finally being noticed. Good examples are climbing in value. Solid driver quality cars are crossing the $40,000 mark, with top-condition cars going higher. That interest is not driven by styling alone. It is driven by what sits under the hood. The heart of the 1970 Toronado GT is the W34 engine. A 455 cubic inch high-compression V8 rated at 400 gross horsepower. that made it the most powerful Oldsmobile engine offered at the time, and arguably the most powerful production Oldsmobile ever by factory rating. What makes this even more unusual is where that power goes. The Toronado was front-wheel drive. The transmission sat ahead of the engine, connected by a massive chain drive. It was an engineering solution unlike anything else in the American market at the time, and Oldsmobile made it work. Visually, the engine bay does not advertise its significance. No special paint, no unique air cleaner, no bold markings by 1970. Those kinds of flourishes were disappearing across the industry. The power was there, but it was understated. The W34 engine was not technically exclusive to the GT package. You could order it in a standard Tornado. But without the GT, you missed the exhaust. The striping and the full identity of the car, if you were going to commit, you committed all the way inside. The story becomes more complicated. By 1970, General Motors was cutting costs across interiors. Compared to the earlier Toronados, especially 1966 and 1967, the cabin feels toned down. The faux wood grain trim does the car no favors. It looks artificial, and it clashes with the Toronado's modern mechanical personality. The front-wheel drive layout does allow a flat floor up front, which improves comfort. The bench seat, with its vinyl and cloth combination, is serviceable and period correct. Power windows were optional, and headrests had become standard by this point. Trunk space, however, was always a limitation. While wider and deeper than some competitors, it was not very tall. You could not stack luggage easily. Compared to full-size Oldsmobiles of the era, practicality was compromised. This would later be corrected when the Toronado moved to a larger platform in the second generation. Color choices in 1970 were also very much of their time. Deep greens like Ming Jade worked beautifully. Others, especially yellow and ochre tones, feel less timeless. The early 1970s were about visibility, about presence, about being noticed. Subtlety was not the goal, and yet despite its flaws, the 1970 Toronado GT stands apart. It was powerful without being loud, advanced without being fragile, different without being experimental for its own sake. Build quality was never its strongest trait. And period road tests noted rattles and assembly issues even when new. That was its Achilles heel. But what remained was a car that dared to challenge conventions. A front-wheel drive American coupe with 400 horsepower. A luxury car that could embarrass muscle cars in a straight line. A design that still feels intentional even decades later. The Toronado did not win the sales race. It did not define a generation, but it quietly carved its own path. And today, finally, people are starting to notice